lawyer's voice cracked over the phone. Gerald Finch's empire was frozen. A 5-acre strip of dirt that nobody wanted had become the only thing standing between a $100 million project and a county sheriff's padlock. Dale Hendricks had waited 23 years for this call. He didn't even say hello. He just listened while everything the bank had ever dismissed came due. Dale Hendricks's phone rang at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. The voice on the other end belonged to a lawyer named Christine Waters, and she was breathing like she'd been running. "Mr. Hendricks, this is counsel for Meridian Development. We need access to your property by Friday. Our client is prepared to offer." Dale set the phone down before she finished the sentence. He'd been expecting this call for 23 years. Maybe not this exact one, not with this exact voice, but something like it. He looked at his workbench, pieces of oak stacked like a puzzle, a hand plane resting against a coffee mug, pencil shavings on the floor. The wood could wait. 2 hours later, the phone rang again. The county auction was held in a basement in Millbrook, Ohio. Folding tables, a coffee pot on a side counter, 4 locals standing against the wall, drinking black coffee and not talking. The auctioneer, a man named Porter with liver spots and tired eyes, stood behind a podium that had been used for 40 years. Dale was 19 years old. He'd saved $1,600 by working construction on new subdivisions, watching contractors build houses that would stand for 40 years and then disappear. He decided to own land instead. Land didn't disappear. The 5-acre parcel came up at 10:15 a.m. Porter said it was creek adjacent, sloped bad, had subsurface rock and wouldn't hold septic. He said it 3 times in different ways because no one was bidding. A man named Gerald Finch stood beside the auctioneer. Finch owned the bank in Millbrook. He owned 2 shopping centers and a farm supply store. His father had fired Dale's grandfather for asking for a second day off to bury his mother. Finch was 53 and wore a cologne that smelled like artificial pine trees. He made decisions about who got credit and who didn't. He never had to ask twice for anything. The first bid came from a developer from Columbus. He raised his hand at $13,500. He was wearing a suit that cost more than the 5 acres. Dale raised his hand at $13,600. The developer raised to $14,200. Dale raised to $14,300. Finch leaned over to Porter and whispered something. Porter smiled. The developer's bidding paddle dropped. Finch turned and looked directly at Dale. Not a glance. A look. The kind of look a man gives when he's already written the ending. Then Finch smiled. He said something to the auctioneer again. Quietly, and Porter nodded. The gavel came down at $16,500, Dale's bid. The room was small enough that everyone had heard the whole thing. 4 locals against the wall looked at Dale like he'd just bought a problem wrapped in a receipt. Finch walked past Dale on his way out. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The smile had been enough. Dale signed the deed and folded the receipt into his coat pocket. That night, he sat at his kitchen table across from his wife, Martha. She was pregnant with their first daughter. The table was small, a hand-me-down from her mother, and it was the only place they sat to talk about money and plans. "That's the whole amount," Martha said. She wasn't asking a question. "Yes," Dale said. "You're sure about it?" "I'm sure." She didn't ask why. She didn't ask what made the land valuable. She just poured more coffee and looked at him the way she'd looked at him when he'd asked her to marry him, like she'd decided something a long time ago and wasn't interested in changing it. Dale went to the county clerk's office the next morning. He asked the woman at the desk, her name was Carol, and she'd worked there for 7 years, if he could see the property survey from 1971. Carol typed the parcel number into her computer. She walked to a filing cabinet and pulled a map. It was water-stained. The edges were folded yellow. A red line ran along the northern edge of the creek, cutting through the parcel like a scar. The line was labeled in typed ink, Water Rights Easement, 1971. Below the line, in different ink, someone had written, Route 47 Construction. State Highway Commission, permanent. Dale didn't ask Carol any questions. He didn't write anything down. He just looked at the map for 45 seconds and memorized the numbers. The easement was 300 feet wide and 1.2 miles long. It started at the creek bed and ran north directly across his 5 acres toward the state highway. He folded the map and handed it back to Carol. "Find what you needed?" she asked. "Yes," he said. He walked out of the county clerk's office and sat in his truck for an hour. His hands weren't shaking. His heart wasn't racing. He was just sitting there, breathing, knowing something that nobody else in that basement had known when they were laughing at him. Finch had checked the survey once. Maybe. The way people check a survey when they're making a decision about someone else's money. Dale had checked it because he'd already decided to buy the land. He started his truck and drove toward the public library. Before this gets even crazier, hit subscribe. Because what Dale found next buried Finch under 30 years of paperwork the bank never thought to. Check. The microfiche reader hummed in the basement of the Millbrook Public Library. September 1986. The screen was bright and made Dale's eyes water. Martha sat 3 tables over, reading a magazine she wasn't actually reading, watching the parking lot because Dale had asked her to. She never asked why. The document was dated 1956, handwritten. Water damage on the left margin. A man named Robert Callow had signed an agreement with the State Highway Commission. The agreement said Robert Callow's land would be used for water passage during the construction of Route 47. The passage was permanent. It belonged to the land, not the man. If Robert Callow died or sold the land, the passage stayed. Robert Callow had owned Dale's 5 acres. The signatures were faded but visible. A highway commissioner named Harold Webb had signed below Callow's name. The date was March 12, 1956. Dale read the document 3 times. Then he asked the librarian if he could use the copy machine. Over the next 8 months, Dale found 12 more documents. A tax abatement from 1963 listing easement maintenance. A county planning meeting from 1971 where a commissioner named Chester Brody had opposed a shopping center development on the adjacent parcel because existing water agreements prevent footprint expansion. A variance denial from 1974. A survey addendum from 1982 that referenced historical state easements still active. The documents weren't hidden. They were just scattered across 30 years in filing cabinets nobody had reason to open. Martha noticed him at the kitchen table with papers arranged by date. She didn't ask what he was doing. Instead, one evening she placed a small hardcover notebook beside his coffee cup. It was blue. The pages inside were blank. "For keeping track," she said. "Of what?" Dale asked. "Whatever it is you're keeping track of." He filled that notebook over the next 3 years. Not with theories, just facts. Dates, names, document numbers, county resolution codes, survey references, cross-references between filings from different decades. The kind of work that looks like obsession until it becomes evidence. In the notebook, he drew a map. His hand wasn't steady, but the map was accurate. The easement started at the creek and ran north. He marked mile markers. He marked elevation changes. He marked where the state highway ran, parallel to the eastern line. He marked the shopping center that had been proposed in 1971 and canceled in 197. 4. He marked the distribution center that Meridian Development was now assembling land for, on the adjacent 280-acre parcel. The easement cut directly through the middle of it. One morning in early 1989, Dale sat at the kitchen table and looked at his map. Martha was making breakfast. The radio was playing. Their daughter, Margaret, was 10 years old and drawing in the living room. Dale traced the easement line with his finger. Then he traced where Meridian's property lines would be if the land assembly was completed. The easement split their corridor in half. If Meridian couldn't build on their own corridor, they couldn't build at all. Dale closed the notebook and placed it in the drawer where he kept his deed. He walked into the county planning office on a Thursday afternoon and placed a single photocopy on the desk. It was the 1971 survey map. The red line was clear. The legend was clear. The date was clear. The clerk was a young woman named Susan. She'd worked there for 3 months. She looked at the map, then at Dale, then back at the map. "That easement," Dale said, "is still there. Still valid. Still mine." Susan typed the parcel number into her computer. She walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out 3 folders. She read through them. Then she called her supervisor. 48 hours later, Meridian Development's zoning request for a distribution center was withdrawn. No statement. No explanation. Just a letter saying the application had been voluntarily dismissed due to site constraints. Meridian's lawyer called the county and asked what constraints. Susan read them the easement filing from 1956. Dale was in his workshop when he heard about it. He was finishing a dresser, a cherry piece, with dovetail joints cut by hand. The radio was on. The news came on at noon. There was no mention of the easement. There was no mention of Meridian. There was only silence from a corporation that had just discovered it couldn't build. He sanded the dresser for 2 more hours. Then he opened his notebook and wrote one line on the final page. "Easement stands, trap set, now we wait." Richard Holt knocked on Dale's front door on a Saturday morning in May 1994. He was young and polished and holding a briefcase like it contained the keys to a kingdom. His suit was pressed. His tie was tied perfectly. He had the kind of smile that comes from closing deals and knowing he would close this one. "Dale Hendricks?" Holt said. "My name is Richard Holt. I represent Meridian Development. I'd like to talk about your easement." Dale didn't move from the doorway. "I'm listening. We'd like to acquire it from you. Full value. No complications. $280,000. That was 3 times what Dale had paid for the entire 5 acres. Martha was inside the house. Their daughter was 14 now. A college fund was sitting in a savings account, small but growing. "No," Dale said. Holt's smile didn't disappear, but something shifted in his eyes. We could go higher. No, Dale said. Why not? Because I'm not selling. Dale closed the door. Martha found him in the workshop 2 hours later. He was running sandpaper over a table leg that didn't need sanding. Are we in trouble? She asked. No, he said. We're in position. She nodded and left him alone. 3 years passed. The second offer came from a law firm in Columbus. They offered $580,000 for a permanent easement surrender. The letter was formal. The amount was huge. Dale read it twice and placed it in the same drawer as the deed and the notebook. He didn't tell Martha about the number. A week later, she asked, how much this time? More, he said. And still no. She went back to making dinner. The third offer came in 2001. A man named Martin Castellano, senior vice president of Meridian Development, flew to Ohio himself. He rented a car. He drove to Dale's workshop on a cold October morning and introduced himself like a man who was used to getting what he wanted. Name your price, Castellano said, within reason. Dale was setting a rabbit joint on a dresser he'd been working on for 3 weeks. The joint was tight. The angle was perfect. It had taken him 4 tries. He didn't look up. It's not for sale. Castellano stood in the workshop for 30 seconds without speaking. Then he left. Dale finished setting the joint. The fit was clean. The next morning, a woman called from Meridian's office. She didn't have an offer. She just said the company would like to meet with Dale and his legal counsel. Dale didn't have legal counsel. He told her he'd think about it. Martha was in the kitchen making pot roast. She'd been making pot roast the same way since the day after the auction, 45 years earlier. Dale sat at the kitchen table and watched her cook. You turned down a lot of money, Martha said. I did. You know why? Because they need it more than we do, Dale said. She smiled and set the plate down in front of him. She was 65 years old. Her hair was gray. Her hands were thin. But the way she smiled told him she'd been waiting since that Tuesday in the basement to hear him say it out, loud. That night, their daughter Margaret called from Columbus. She was a lawyer now. She asked her father about the easement. She asked what he'd done with the offers. Nothing, Dale said. They're in a drawer. All of them. You should show them to someone. I will, Dale said, when the time comes. For the next 10 years, nothing happened. The newsletter in Millbrook reported that Meridian Development was expanding in other counties. They built 3 distribution centers in Indiana. They built 2 in Kentucky. They never came back to the property near Dale's land. The 280-acre parcel they'd assembled sat empty. The LLC that owned it paid taxes. A sign went up at the entrance saying Future Industrial Corridor. Then the sign came down. Dale mowed his 5 acres twice a year, in the spring, in the fall. He kept the survey markers clear. He paid the annual tax bill on time every spring. It was $47. He wrote the check himself. On a Tuesday morning in March 2014, the phone rang. It was a woman named Susan Yao. She said she was Meridian Development's chief counsel. She said she needed to talk to Dale about the easement. But first, she said, she wanted to bring someone to meet him. The voice on the phone was different than Richard Holt's voice, different than Martin Castellano's voice. Susan Yao sounded like someone who had already lost and was calling to negotiate the terms of defeat. Dale set the phone down and looked at Martha. They're coming back, he said. I know, Martha said. She had always known. Susan Yao's voice came through the phone like she was standing in a room full of people who couldn't hear her talking. We're prepared to offer $12 million for the easement, Mr. Hendricks. In full, tax-free transfer, immediate. Dale didn't say anything, Mr. Hendricks? I heard you, he said. Will you consider? No, Dale said, and hung up the phone. He set the receiver down on the kitchen counter. Martha was standing at the stove. She didn't turn around. She didn't ask who had called or what they'd wanted. She just kept stirring the coffee, waiting for it to finish brewing. After 41 years of marriage, she'd learned to wait for Dale to speak first. $12 million, Dale said. Martha poured the coffee into 2 mugs, and you said no. I said no. She handed him a mug and sat across from him at the table. The same table where they'd planned a life together on the day after the auction. The wood was older now. The stain was worn at the corners. But the table was still there, still solid, just like Dale was still there, still certain. They'll call back, Martha said. I know, Dale said. The next day, Susan Yao and an environmental scientist named Dr. Robert Chen came to Dale's house. Chen was carrying a binder. It was thick. It looked like it weighed 10 pounds. He opened it at the kitchen table and showed Dale maps, soil samples, hydrology reports, subsurface surveys, color photographs of rock formations, charts with percentages and arrows and projected water flow rates. He explained very carefully, very slowly, that Meridian's industrial corridor sat directly above an underground aquifer that fed 3 municipalities' water supplies. Your easement, Dr. Chen said, is the only legal mechanism that prevents us from building without EPA involvement and 10 years of litigation. He said it like Dale didn't already know. Susan Yao sat across from him. She was wearing a dark suit. Her phone was on the table, face down. She was waiting for Dale to react, to hesitate, to show some crack in the wall he'd built over 28 years. Dale didn't move. We could go higher, Susan said. 15 million, if you sign today. No, Dale said. 18 million. Dale stood up and walked to the kitchen sink. He looked out the window at the 5 acres beyond. The easement line ran through that land like a vein through a wrist. It was carrying money now, not just water. It was carrying Dale's future through his fingers and into the generations coming after him. You should go, he said. Susan and Dr. Chen left without finishing their coffee. Margaret came to the house that Saturday. She was Dale's daughter and an estate attorney, and she brought her boss, Harold Stearns, a water rights specialist from Columbus. Harold was 67 years old and had handled water disputes across 4 states. He'd seen corporate lawyers try every trick in the book. He'd seen families fight over rivers and aquifers and the right to divert water for profit. He'd never seen a chain of title like the one Dale had in the blue notebook. They brought boxes. Margaret brought file folders from her office. They spread the permit files across the kitchen table. They placed the original deed beside them. They placed Dale's notebook beside that, the blue one. The one Martha had given him in 1986 when he was just starting to understand what he'd bought. Harold read through the documents without speaking. He read the 1956 agreement. He read the 1963 tax abatement. He read the 1971 survey. He read the 1974 variance denial. He read the 1982 addendum. He read the 1989 county filing. He read every single document that Dale had found in basements and filing cabinets and microfiche machines over 28 years. His reading glasses moved down the pages. His finger traced lines. His eyebrows moved up and down with surprise, and then satisfaction. Then Harold looked at Margaret. This is the cleanest chain of title I've ever seen for a water easement, he said. They can't break it. They can't argue it away. They can't challenge the filing. The county kept taxing it. That means they kept acknowledging it. That means it's been alive the entire time, sleeping under their feet. Dale sat in the corner and watched his daughter's face change. She'd been a lawyer for 10 years, but she'd never seen her father like this. Not angry, not even satisfied. Just patient, just certain. They want a deal, Margaret said. They called me. What did you tell them? Harold asked. That my father would listen, Margaret said, but that he wouldn't sell. Margaret called Susan Yao back the next morning. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. Margaret listened. She asked one question. She said no twice. She hung up. What did they say? Dale asked. They want to negotiate, Margaret said, but not a purchase. What then? A lease, she said. Permanent monthly payments, adjusted for inflation, transferable to heirs. Dale didn't say anything. It's $18,000 a month, Dad. Martha put the kettle on. $18,000 a month. $216,000 a year for the rest of his life. For his children's lives. For his grandchildren's lives if he had them. For a strip of land that Gerald Finch had watched him buy for $16,500 3 decades before and had laughed about out loud in a basement full of witnesses. Tell them yes, Dale said. Just like that? Margaret asked. Just like that. Margaret made the call. The lawyer on the other end, a new lawyer, not Susan Yao, asked to negotiate. Margaret said no. He asked to adjust the terms. Margaret said no. He asked about a cap on the payments after a certain number of years. Margaret said no. He asked if Dale would consider a lump sum instead, maybe $20 million just to close the deal and move on. My father doesn't want a lump sum. Margaret said, he wants it monthly, for as long as I live, for as long as my children live, every month, same time, same amount, adjusted every year for inflation. That's the deal. The lawyer said he needed to call her back. He needed to talk to his team. He needed to confirm with his board. Margaret waited. The lawyer called back in 16 minutes. Your father's terms are accepted, he said. Margaret turned to Dale. You got it. Dale picked up his phone and called Martha, even though she was standing 5 feet away. It's done, he said. I know, Martha said. The kettle's on. The first check arrived on the 1st of the month, just like Susan Yao had promised, $18,000. Dale opened the envelope at the kitchen table. He didn't look at the amount twice. He didn't let himself feel anything. He just folded the check and walked to his workshop. The desk was small and covered in pencil shavings from 40 years of furniture making. He opened the drawer and pulled out the blue notebook, the one Martha had given him 28 years ago. He turned to the final page. The last line he'd written was, easement stands, trap set, now we wait. He picked up a pen and wrote one line below it, the waiting is over. The second check came the next month, then the third, then the fourth. They all came on the 1st, like clockwork. like the interest on a loan that never ends, like compound patience finally bearing fruit. Dale stopped looking at the amounts. The amounts didn't matter anymore. The fact that they kept coming was the only thing that mattered. 2 months later, Margaret took him to the county clerk's office. There was paperwork to file. A recorded water rights agreement between Dale Hendricks' property and the municipality. New terms, new party. Same easement that had been sleeping under Meridian Development's plans for 25 years. The clerk stamped the documents and filed them in a cabinet that would be searched for the next 100 years. On the way to the truck, Dale stopped and looked at the building. He'd been there countless times, to search for documents, to file his deed, to watch a system work the way it was supposed to work if you had patience and time and the refusal to rush. He opened his notebook one more time and turned to the line he'd written 2 months earlier. He crossed it out. Above it, he wrote, "The waiting never really ends. It just changes shape." The local newspaper ran a 3-paragraph article about Meridian Development's new water rights, lease with a local property owner. No names, no details, just the facts. The article ran on a Tuesday. By Thursday, nobody in Millbrook was talking about it anymore. But someone was. Gerald Finch's nephew, who'd taken over the bank after Finch died in 2008, read the article. He looked at the property description. He looked at the dollar amount. He remembered the story from his uncle, the one about the young man at the auction who'd bought the worthless 5 acres. He called a friend who'd been there that day. The friend told him everything. The nephew sat in his office for 3 hours after that. He didn't move. He didn't make any phone calls. He just sat there, understanding finally what his uncle had missed. 4 locals in Millbrook who'd watched the auction 43 years earlier read the article too. They remembered the young man with the savings and the banker with the smile. One of them, a woman named Patricia, pulled out an old newspaper clipping from 1971. It mentioned the shopping center development that had been canceled. She looked at the article about the lease. She understood what had happened, finally after 4 decades. She called her sister and told her the whole story. Martha sat on the porch of the house she and Dale had built together, reading the newspaper. She didn't say anything about the article. She didn't smile at it or wave it at Dale or talk about vindication. She just poured more coffee and looked at her husband. 63 years old now, his hair gray, his hands still steady from decades of careful work, and smiled the way she'd smiled when he'd said, "I'm sure," at the kitchen table in 1973. Some men collect problems. Some men collect money. Dale Hendricks collected patience, and patience turned a banker's laugh into an income that would outlast the banker by 16 years and continue paying his family long after he was gone. If you had been Dale, would you have taken the $18 million offer when it came? Or would you have held out just like he did for the long-term monthly deal?